Claire.
How
It's
are
a
you?
very big lounge.
It's very big, yeah.
For only 2 people.
I suggested that Matt could lie down and we could pretend it was therapy. And you could just tell me all your secrets.
I bloody need it.
Now, I have this vision of a day in the food life of Matt Moran, of you sort of waking up to some sort of artisanal sourdough and some sort of hand-grown avocado. Do you eat any just rubbish?
I can be honest and say I don't eat a lot of rubbish. I remember, when my kids were teenagers and one of them got invited to go to McDonald's and they didn't know what it was.
Social death.
But, look, do I eat fancy food all the time? No, I don't. I love entertaining. I love having big lunches, and it's not uncommon for me to have a boiled egg on toast on a Sunday night. So it's not all caviar and foie gras and luxury, and wagyu, should I say.
Yeah.
I actually enjoy my non-chef friends or industry friends inviting me over and cooking for me, and I'm just...
Are people too scared to cook for you?
Not many do it. There's a couple over the years, but just grateful that, someone else is cooking for me. And in fact, I just went away on a weekend to some friend's house down near Berry, and they were adamant that I was not cooking. But strangely enough, I ended up bringing half the food and cooking half the meals. Not because I don't trust someone else, but I actually just still really enjoy it.
Yeah. Do you get to cook as much as you want to now?
Yeah, I do. Well, not so much in the restaurants. There's 14 places, I think, in the group now. I spend a bit of time in 1 or 2 kitchens, Aria, Chiswick sometimes. Rockley Pub, I spent a bit of time. I did the deep fryer a couple of months ago, actually, a night. They were down. When I started at Parramatta RSL nearly 40 years ago, all I wanted to do was be on the deep fryer. But the guy on the deep fryer had been there for 5 years, and the guy on the grill had been there for 4 years. And I thought, geez, just one day if I get that chance. And 6 months ago, I got the chance at Rockley Pub, and
it looks like great fun.
The sous chef, said to me, "What section do you want to do?" And I said, "Oh, it's your kitchen. You tell me what to do." She said, "You can do the deep fryer." And I went, "Finally, I got there."
Is it really, you're lowering big vats of chips in there? Is it great?
A little bit of finesse, making sure when the fish and chips are properly cooked. But look, no, I cook at home a lot, and I cook for friends. I'm not one of those chefs when I get home. I don't want to, look at the stove. I find it really therapeutic, and I enjoy it, and my family enjoy it, so it's a nice little thing to do.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the chips at the Rockley Pub, because Matt, if you don't know, and if you didn't listen to the front this morning, Matt bought the pub in your kind of local hometown, the hometown nearby.
Well, I've got a history back in the town. My great-grandfather was married in the church behind the pub in 1883, and the family sort of, they were all convicts, but they ended up, migrating out to that way, and my grandfather became a shearer, shearer, and grew spuds in Black Springs, and ended up with a sizable land holding by the 1900s. But he met his wife apparently in Rockley, which is about 20 minutes away from Black Springs. Driving back in those days, he would have horsed it down.
Down to the Big Smoke.
Down to the Big Smoke, Rockley. 3,000 people lived in Rockley at one point during the gold rush, and there's only 200 people there now. And I didn't know all this until I did a TV show called Who Do You Think You Are? But a lot of history there. But we've had the family farm, or it's now my farm, but it was family, for 20-odd years at Rockley. So got bored in COVID and thought if I can spend more time at the farm, I need something to do. So I bought the pub to my partner's dislike. But
She didn't see herself as pulling beers in the front bar of the Rockley Pub?
No, she's a judge.
I'm sure she'd get some frank opinions. Because I looked up the menu of the Rockley Pub today to see how much everything costs, because one of the things we've been talking about here today is cost. The fish and chips are $29. Over at Aria, which of course is your most, probably your most famous restaurant, the very beautiful Aria, it's $120 for 2 courses, $180 for 3. So that's kind of $60 a plate. How have you... that's what I want to ask. Is that cheap? How do you manage the expectation from the crowd of what prices are going to be, and how do you keep the cost down?
Yeah, look, Rockley Pub is a good one, going back to the fish and chips, because you will find, there's about 8 pubs in Bathurst. A lot of the gaming's been taken out of them, so they're all after the same market. And you will go there and you will see fish and chips for $24, $25. It was hard, obviously, when I first opened Rockley. With the locals, they didn't like me because their interpretation or what they thought that I was going to be is probably a little bit different. A lot of them work there now, and I love the locals, and we're very close. We sort of work closely together with lots of different things in charity stuff and whatever else. But when they first saw the prices, like, oh my God, you're charging more than what you are in Bathurst, and the reason is that it's quality of goods and freshness. A lot of those pubs in town are pulling I&J things out of the freezer, is where we're using fresh fish, obviously, and that's what the costs are. So it's all about, I suppose, with the locals, was explaining and educating them that try it, and you tell me what you think. I had a pizza oven that someone gave me, a big one up at the farm, and one of my staff went up there this week and she took it out of the garage and went and set it up. If you look at the Rockley's Instagram page this week, it's all been about pizzas, and she's been making pizzas. And she had a trial night. She invited the town to come up and try a pizza. So she's just giving them all pizzas to try and making them realise, that they're handmade and whatever else. And then last night I looked at the revenue, and we've had our biggest Thursday night for about 3 months. They all came back and ordered them.
Wow. And who's your competitor for pizza in Rockley? Is there a Domino's, or is anyone else doing it? Or?
We're the only business in Rockley.
Yeah.
But, it's we are the only business. That's one of the reasons why I really wanted to buy it, was because I didn't want it to not be a business.
Yeah.
And it sort of started just acquiring the pub and then buying, land around it and looking for the future and doing new things, accommodation, luxury accommodation, proper restaurant, maybe, functions and things like that.
Well, without wanting to be too sort of highfalutin about it, without a venture like that in a town like Rockley, eventually the town becomes unviable, doesn't it?
It does.
What does that do to our agricultural workforce? And, not every town can have a Matt Moran pub.
No. Look, every town needs a pub, regardless. It is the meeting point that's the most important point in the pub. I didn't realise once you become a pub in a tiny little town, you become the publican and the mayor and, the cop and you name it.
You're fixing the potholes.
You are. Matt, there's a pothole. Can you please ring the mayor? Matt, there's a new cop moving in. Can you please have a chat to him? And make sure, guys, they come to you for everything. But, part of that and my nature, I love that. I love sort of helping people and looking after people. So the older I get, the more I like it and enjoy it. So, I can't remember your question, Claire, but
what happens to, our agricultural workforce?
Oh, yeah.
We've talked a lot about that.
And that's really important. It is the mainstay of the town, and it's where people meet, and it's where they greet, and it's where they drink. And, I realised very quickly when I bought the pub, there was no responsible sale of alcohol there. And we put that into place, and then you realise...
Maybe that's why there's a new cop.
Yeah, and part of it, no, I don't think so, but it's, how do you look after your customers, by driving them home and looking after them, and the last thing you want to do is for them, pub to close down in a little town, and then they're driving, an hour away, and that's when accidents happen. So, I didn't buy the pub to drive them home, trust me. But it's...
You need them to come back next week, so...
Yeah.
You now have, as you said, 14 establishments. So you have economy of scale that so many food businesses don't have. And we've all had that experience of seeing the local neighbourhood place that shuts down, someone tries to open it again, and you just have this sinking feeling that it's gonna die again. How do you manage the economic benefits of having scale while still allowing creativity for your chefs at these various places? How do you make sure they're not all cooking snapper this week?
It's a good point. Different venues are treated differently, but also, we have a policy that, we kind of let our GMs, our restaurant managers, our executive chefs have ownership of what they're doing, and that's. I think I decided I was very much wanted to put my finger on every plate that went out when I first started, and got to the point is where am I going in life? Do I want to have one restaurant and try and make it the best in the world, or do I actually want to expand and also nurture some of this talent that I've got within the restaurant? I chose that, and you've got you've got to let your staff feel as though they've got a little bit of ownership and they write the menus. I oversee it, of course, as long as it's on narrative. When it comes to buying and buying power, you know, a lot of that, you know, that top end is probably a little bit different. They can sort of use who they want, but for the base of it, that's where you obviously try and do your deals. And being in alcohol too, you've obviously tried and do as many deals as you possibly can when it comes to buying beer and stuff like that. Rockley's probably buying a lot cheaper beer than a lot of other places because it's the mass group. You know, it is, scalability is also good, but you know, when things turn around the other way, it's also the, it can be work the other way. Like COVID for us was, you know, astronomically bad, you know, having such a massive business and massive debtors too. So that was an interesting time to sort of navigate.
We now have, of course, record low unemployment. Does that mean you have no trouble finding staff and it's all sweet?
Coming back from COVID, I lost 250 staff that was sponsored. So they were gone, and no one was rushing back into Australia, or they weren't allowed to. You know, you only have to look at the way that I reopened all my venues, and they were all staggered. You know, it took ARIA 18 months, nearly 2 years to actually open right back up again. And that was because we didn't have staff, and we didn't have skilled staff. You know, now, yeah, we still find it incredibly difficult to find labour, and good labour. There's not a lot of young Australian chefs coming into the industry like there used to be. You know, when I first started at the RSL Club, I went to 20 different interviews before I got my first real apprenticeship job. You know, it doesn't happen anymore. You know, and particularly in the country, you know, it's even harder again.
Yeah.
You know, we're lucky at Rockley, but, you know, I've got a mate that's got a few pubs regional, and it's impossible. You know, they're relocating families pretty much there and giving them incentives to obviously, you know, operate their businesses.
What about as a primary producer? You're a beef producer.
Beef and lamb.
Yeah,
and a few pigs.
Yeah, and previously pizza, but now that's happening
pizza
at their...
too. Yeah. Pigs would eat the pizza, actually. They'll eat anything.
How have you found the you know, finding labour for that business out in the bush?
Yeah, look, I'm very, very blessed. You know, I've got an incredible farm manager who grew up in the country himself and then ended up doing a teaching degree and became a physics and an ag teacher. And used to help us, or help my father a little bit when my father was on the farm with cattle, and he was very good with cattle. And they just got chatting one day, and I was in the process of, you know, retiring my father and buying him out. And Brendan just said to my father one day, he goes, "Geez, I'd love to run Green Hills one day. It's such a beautiful property." And he lived opposite. He's had a little tiny place opposite. And Dad goes, "Really?" He goes, "Well, you know, that might be the case." He said, "Why do you want to give up teaching?" He said, I love the kids, but I hate the teachers." And Brendan came and worked for me, and same thing, you know, Brendan treats the Green Hills like it's his own, and I obviously look after him because of that. You know, finding staff to make sure Brendan didn't burn himself out.
Yeah.
You know, that was really hard, and I've got a young boy there now. Brendan's about to go on holidays for 5 weeks. I'll spend most of my time up there if I can. But, you know, finding that person was virtually impossible. To get a young kid, you know, straight out of school that wanted to do farming was virtually impossible. And, you know, we've got the name, we've got the brand, we've got, you know, great working conditions, and it was still bloody hard. So, you know, I sympathise with any farmer out there looking for staff, because it's really hard.
What is the solution to, you know, some or any of that? Is it Australians holidaying domestically, so we're in those towns creating revenue, or what?
Look, I think there's, you know, without getting too political, you know, there's got to be more incentives for, you know, farming's tough. We all, you know, I'm preaching to the people that know it more than anyone. You know, it's a tough, and it's not sexy anymore. You know, it's not, you know.
We just had a whole panel about making farming sexy
again. Oh, did you?
Again.
Sorry,
yeah,
I didn't listen to it. But,
no, they would agree with you, I think.
You know, it's a tough industry. It's like hospitality. Margins are small, and you're relying on the gods in many ways. You know, I see it in Rockley. You know, I'm lucky I've got other income. But if I was just a farmer, geez, you know, I've got a farm the size that would, feed 5 families 100 years ago, you'd be lucky to feed, 2.
Yeah.
It's tough.
Yeah. Food waste is something you've become passionate about.
Yeah.
We've heard a little bit this morning about big sort of enterprise-wide solutions to that, making vegetable powders out of surplus vegetables, for example. But what about on the kind of more human scale? What can we all be doing to reduce food waste and the shocking environmental consequences of that?
Look, it comes back from when I was a young chef working at the restaurant Manfredi back in Ultimo, and Franco Manfredi was born in the 1940s and came out to Australia as an Italian immigrant. And I was cleaning broccoli, and I threw a broccoli stalk in the bin. And geez, I've never heard anyone yell at me so much. It made Gordon Ramsay look like a juvenile from throwing broccoli stalk. And that's a part of a joke, but it's also very true. And being a chef and being a restaurateur, it's your margin that you're throwing in the bin. And I've been involved with this app, Safel, which basically you go to your fridge and you punch in your things and we'll give you a recipe to do. That's part of it. But just the amount of food that we waste, I think it's over 7 million tonnes of food wastage in Australia. 70% of food wastage in Australia is edible. 1 in 5 shopping bags are wasted, a person's home. And every family's wasting an average between $2,500 and $3,000 worth of food a year. I think everyone's been guilty of it, buying that roast chicken and eating it and then just leaving it in the fridge to go to waste and then throwing it out is where there's a million things you could be doing with it. It just makes sense. It makes sense for the current moment of how tough people are doing it when it comes to food and knowing, that they can get a couple of extra meals out of something that they've bought previously. It just makes sense to me, and cost of living obviously is harder.
Well, Paddock to Plate, of course, was your most famous probably effort to help Australians understand where their food comes from and why it shouldn't be wasted, of course.
Yeah, Paddock to Plate came from a vision, and it was my show, and I own the rights with Foxtel and ITV. It was great about me travelling Australia and seeing incredible producers and cooking their stuff and seeing out there, but it was really to highlight the growers and the producers of Australia and their story and how hard they do it and how hard they work, because I'd seen it we lost our farms, when I was, mid-70s and ended up growing up in Blacktown, which is the western suburbs of Sydney, and wondering why we didn't have these, sprawling farms like I did when I was young, and knowing what my parents went through and my grandparents went through, and how tough it was. So it was a real plight just to give something back to those incredible producers, because I stand by it now and I'll say it forever. I wouldn't be in the position I am. I wouldn't be the chef I am or was, or restaurateur if it wasn't for those producers, because they're the guys that are putting the food on the plate. We're just curating it.
Yeah. Now, finally, we've had a bit of discussion about the price of coffee, because that's obviously everyone's benchmark of the cost of living and discretionary spending and how much we're actually prepared to spend.
Yeah.
Is $7 or $8 too much for a coffee?
I was in Switzerland 2 years ago and went out and got a short black and a piccolo, and it was $27.50 for the two of them.
Wow.
I know how much coffee has gone up in the last 12 months worldwide. Look, you know what? It's handmade, it's hand processed. You've got some guy sitting there, and anyone complaining about paying $5 for a coffee now, how can they?
Matt Moran, thank you very much.
Pleasure, Claire.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
And you.